Hello and welcome. As you can tell, my setting is a bit different because I'm still in Jerusalem, and yet I realized that I wouldn't have an opportunity to be able to record this week's devotionals um, between the time I get back and when they're due to be published. So I thought it'd be best for me to take the opportunity while I still have some time off, particularly on Shabbat. We have come to the end of our tour. Most of our tour group is heading back to the States right now and over the next few days. And my wife and I will be here for a couple more days as well. Being Shabbat, there isn't a whole lot going on, so we thought we'd kind of seize the opportunity to get some of these devotionals recorded and get them really transported to where they need to go and then get uploaded so that you can continue without having any interruption to our daily series through the book of Proverbs. Basically, I wanted to do with the background looking out at the city, but the problem is it's so bright out that we can't, the contrast is gone. So I hope you understand all of that stuff. But if you're just joining us, we every day go through a portion of the scriptures, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. And a few weeks ago, we started looking at the book of Proverbs, something that I've really wanted to do for a long time because it's something that I've made a daily part of my life for many decades. And I find that as you read one chapter a day, you kind of cover the whole book in a month. And so even though I read in the Old Testament and the New Testament every day, as I also read through the Proverbs and the Psalms every day, and that's particularly the Proverbs have been very helpful for me in understanding how life works. In fact, I'm thinking about in Deuteronomy 4 different times the Lord said through Moses to the children of Israel, he says, observe and obey all of these words which I command you, that it may go well with you and your children after you. And there's a certain practical side of living our lives day to day. On one side, one aspect, we focus a lot upon the spiritual issues in our life, that we're in the Word, we're hearing from God, we're praying, and we're developing our spiritual man, because as Paul said, that bodily exercise profits for a little while or for a little bit, but spiritual development and discipline and exercise profits us for time and eternity. And so what I find interesting about the book of Proverbs, it focuses us really in terms of our material, physical life upon the things that really matter, but basically saying you need to see your everyday life through the lens of God's Holy Spirit and through His Word. And so if we do that, he says, your life overall will go well. It doesn't mean that you won't have any difficult times or any challenges. But when you look at the broader scope of your life from birth to death, your time that you spend here on the planet, that journey will go well. It'll be profitable in similar ways that Paul would have put it in Romans 8:28 when he says that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him and follow his plan for their life. And that doesn't mean that everything that goes on in our life is good. We all kind of understand that there are some really negative things that happen because we live in a fallen, broken world. Sometimes they're the consequence of our own disobedience. Sometimes the consequence of our own ignorance. So there's things that we just don't know or foresee. And sometimes they're the consequence of evil people whose lives are controlled and empowered by evil spirits. And so all those things really kind of conspire in many ways to make life difficult and challenging. But the promise of God is that he will show us a way, that he will provide a path, and that in critical junctures, he will intercede and make a difference. And so the very first thing is we're looking at chapter 3 of Proverbs today. And beginning in verse 1, I really call this the pathway of grace or the pathway of goodness. In this opening verses of chapter 3, Solomon lays out some really critical foundation things that we need to focus on, and they fit under that continual rubric of contrast and comparison, where he says, do not do this, but do this instead. And I think that verses 1 and 2 really begin to lay that out very clearly, where Solomon writes, he says, my son, do not forget my law, But let your heart keep my commands, for length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Now, when he talks about don't forget my law, there are many Christians who don't understand law in its generic sense. They hear the word law, they think about the laws of Moses, not just the Ten Commandments, but the other 603 ordinances and rituals and instructions, which don't often have direct application to you and I in the daily life. But when he's talking about here about don't forget my law, he's basically saying God has a governing set of principles that the universe is subjected to. We understand them in their material limitations. We'll talk about the law of gravity, there's laws of motion and so forth. These are scientific processes which basically people have observed things that happen in a way. We know that things don't fall up, they fall down. We know that a body in motion has a certain power that needs a proportionate distance to slow that motion down. That's why airplanes have to not only force themselves against the power of gravity, but when they land, they also have to continue to resist the force and the motion that put them in the air in the first place. We understand that for every cause there is an equal and proportionate reaction. And this applies not just to the material world, but also applies to the spiritual world. And so what Solomon is saying is, my son, realize that you are not really kind of this free agent who can just do whatever you want with impunity and not expect that there'll be consequences. And that's, I think, one of the things that many people don't realize. They believe that there isn't a God. They believe that they self-created, or that we kind of exist by some kind of mystery. And they don't understand that if you sow to the flesh, you will reap corruption. That's the law of reciprocity. I mean, that whatever you do will have an equal and opposite reaction. If you do good, it will cause good to react to you. And if you do evil, that the consequence will be evil as well. And so one of the things that Solomon's saying to his son and to all of us, essentially, as part of his family, that if we want to see our lives blessed and prosperous and generally to come to the end of our days and say, it was good with my soul, then basically he says, if you want those long life and length of days, if you want peace to be added to your life as opposed to turmoil, then you need to begin by recognizing that there's are greater life principles that you need to submit to. And this is true certainly of the non-Christian as well as the Christian. I mean, when people like Jordan Peterson, because I'm not sure whether or not he's a believer or not, some say he is, some say he's not, I don't know, but I know he wrote a book called The 12 Principles of Life, and it was really attractive to a lot of young people who were living in basically an amoral world where they're basically told there's no such thing as right and wrong, good or evil, truth or falsehood. Instinctively, we know that's nonsense, but even actually, when we begin to live our lives like that, we begin to experience the chaos that kind of life brings. That the idea that when we reduce love down to simply a sexual encounter, it doesn't take long to realize that something is really significantly wrong. When Paul says to the Corinthians that if a man sleeps with a woman, they become like one flesh, there's an emotional, psychological dynamic that is involved in that intimacy. And then when people start just going in and out of intimate relationship, they begin to suffer emotionally, psychologically, even physically. And I don't just simply mean that you can become subject to all sorts of sexually transmitted diseases, which is part of that dynamic, but also you begin to realize that you have reduced yourself to the level of an animal, or what the New Testament called the sarkikos man, the man who lives only for the fulfillment of his sensational pleasures. That God has created us with a spiritual dynamic as well. We have a soul, and that soul which is within us, which is our consciousness, not limited just to our brain, as neuroscientists are beginning to discover, but this sense of consciousness, self-awareness, and self-identity that is unique to us and makes you, you, and me, is something that is impacted by the way that we interact with the world around us. And so one of the things that Solomon begins by saying is realizing that that soul is meant to submit himself to a set of rules about right and wrong, truth and falsehood, good and evil. And the Bible very clearly delineates what those behaviors are. And yet for people who don't know the scriptures, and or have no conscience or will to submit to God and his word and the scriptures. For them, it's kind of a chaotic existence, and they wonder why. And the answer is because we have been created by God to fear him and to follow him. And so Solomon says this first principle of life that we need to submit to is the idea that God has rules for life. He has ways in which we're to live. To lie, to cheat, to steal, to break the Ten Commandments, really, is a violation of the laws of life that are greater than just what we believe morally or think ethically. They're things that are pretty much hardwired into our conscience, they're hardwired into our soul, they're hardwired into the universe. And again, as Solomon said, and Moses said as well, if you want it to go well with you in life, you need to submit yourself to these truths. So we'll continue on tomorrow as we pick up this discussion with another do not, and that's in verse 3 where he does do not, he says, do not forget to or forsake my law. Join you then. God bless you.